Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, your host here, Brian Parker, excited to hang out with you again for another episode of our All Me podcast. In today's chat, we're continuing our series with one of our amazing partners, the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, which you now know we all call PBSCCS. You may be aware of our Major League Baseball All Me Advisory Board, and PBSCCS is one of our partners that actually helps make that happen. It's been awesome to work together to inspire people to achieve their physical goals without the use of PEDs. And this is one of the reasons why we've been teaming up and bringing you a series of podcast episodes narrowing in on a variety of performance topics. So in this episode, we're talking with Casey Callison. He's a minor league strength and conditioning coach for the Toronto Blue Jays. Casey and I kick things off by talking about his background as an athlete and how that led him into the strength and conditioning field, while also talking about his topic, which is conditioning and workload management. I talked to Casey about what workload management means to him, the importance of rest and recovery in this area, how performance is affected by focusing on this topic, and the importance of creating a schedule. We talk about the other keys that have to be in place alongside that schedule, what you should be doing on your off days, and his thoughts about those that might be tempted to PEDs to achieve these goals. Casey also offers his own contact info to help you with your own workload management, which is great. We thank Casey for that offer, for his time, and we thank PBSCCS for their support in making this happen. We also want to say thank you to our partners over at Gatorade for sponsoring this episode. So let's make it happen right now and bring Casey into the show. Hey Casey, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Great. How are you, Brian?
Doing great. I've already know that this is going to be a nice talk because you and I both live in North Carolina. I'm liking the theme here. You're the second person of this series that have figured out that this is the best state to be. So I think we're already off to a good start. And on top of that, I appreciate you giving us a little bit of time. This series has been really good. It's been really informative. I've learned a lot, but I know our listeners have as well. And what we're doing here is basically part of our PBS CCS series. We're finding strength coaches from all across different levels of Major League and minor league baseball and talking to them to a variety of different topics. And so really diving into specific things as we go. And as I'm doing this, what I'm also taking the chance to do is get to know each of you a little bit. So that's kind of where I've been starting these conversations. So I think that's probably a good place for you and I to start and keep that going. So I'm going to ask you a pretty broad question and let you kind of pull out the specifics that you want to. But let's start by you telling us a little bit about the early days of Casey. So where you're from, stuff like that. Probably what makes the most sense is, a little bit of your background in baseball, and then when did strength and conditioning come into the mix as well?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Great way to start it off. So I'm actually originally from Wisconsin, moved to North Carolina, love it there. But I grew up in Wisconsin and I was involved in a lot of sports. I went to a very competitive high school, and I started off in baseball was my first sport. I got in track and field. I got into basketball, and I will say I did not necessarily start completely in baseball because as I went throughout schooling, it was more track and field and basketball for myself. And it was funny because I remember my senior year of school, and I was in track and field. I'm sitting there trying to figure things out because I will say, like, schooling was not my biggest thing. I didn't really like it as a kid growing up, and it wasn't until my parents told me, hey, like, you better figure this stuff out because you're not going to stay with us the rest of your life. That's when I just decided. I was like, you know what? Like, track is cool. Sports are cool. I can't see myself doing like a sit down job for the rest of my life. So I talked to my track coach, and he mentioned the college that I ended up going to, the University of Wisconsin La Crosse. But it just was kind of like that day when my parents told me that, and after having the conversation with my track coach was kind of when I decided that I really wanted to get into strength and conditioning. So I really like the idea of developing athletes. And as I was able to go throughout more schooling, it just really, really kind of built that passion more. But yeah, I mean, again, my early years of school, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I just wanted to hang out with my buddies and have fun. And like, luckily enough, it seems like things timed up perfectly because like, I love this career, man. It's like, we're able to work with guys every day. We're able to have fun. We're going out there. We're playing a sport for a living. So very fortunate for it, but that was kind of like the early years of Casey Callison and kind of, getting into strength and conditioning.
That makes sense. I don't think your story is abnormal at all. I think I've said this so many times on here that in some ways I think it's a little bit crazy to like basically tell kids like, hey, you're 16, you're 18, you got to figure out what you want to do with your life. It's like, man, you haven't been on this earth long enough to really know that answer too much. So it's kind of like, all right, if you got to start to think about that. I did the same thing, right? Like I don't really know what I want to do. I like sports. I'll study sports management. I'll see where that takes us. And that, got me to where I'm at. So, I think it's good. I think it's like, look around, see what you're interested in, and try to find a field that kind of matches that, which is what you did. And I think it's obviously worked out. It's gotten to where you're at now. And that's kind of want to continue that initial background and learn a little bit more about how that just initial interest took you to where you're at now. So tell us a little bit more about, okay, once you found out this is an interest, this is a field that I think I'd like to do. I want to do this as a job. What was next? So in regards to, you told us where you went to school. What did you study there? And then where did that take you in regards to a career path up to what you do now with the Blue Jays?
Sure. So as soon as I found out where I was going to go, I just kind of started researching it, because one thing I had heard at that time was, in order to get into the college that you want, you have to have good grades. So kind of what I ended up doing was I didn't apply to the school right away. I ended up going to a junior college, and I was there for a year because, again, I knew I kind of had to prove myself to show that I could be studious, things of that nature. But again, I really researched the school itself and then also the program. And one thing that I noticed was, for the program to get in, because you had to kind of interview and, again, like, show that you'd be a good candidate for it. They did want experience. So it didn't have to be anything crazy. I think actually it was more so just like shadowing hours of like, go out and get a couple different environments, or whether it was private sector, collegiate, like whatever it might be, but just go ahead and like get some of that experience. So when I saw that, and again, right, is like everybody just kind of being, competitive. I was like, well, I don't just want to go and like hit that standard of like, let me get my 3 and I'm good. As soon as I found out what they were looking for, I pretty much just tried to have like internships or just experience, even if it wasn't paid, just in the field. So my first internship that I got was at a local Anytime Fitness in town. And just kind of like, as I was going to my first year of college at the community school, I would go to school there. I would go and I would intern at Anytime Fitness. And I was also lucky enough, I was working at a GNC back then too. So I was able to kind of like bring everything together, which was awesome. But I will say, like, throughout from then, I guess that was 2011 or 2012. Yeah, 2011 is when I graduated high school. So into that summer, I just pretty much, I went all in, and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything that could basically tell them I wasn't a good candidate. So like, that would kind of be a recommendation I would have for people as well too, is like, if you're thinking about getting into it, is like, obviously make sure you're committed. There's a couple different paths that you can go, whether it's a PT, an athletic trainer, a strength coach, but just like, don't settle for the standard that they put out there. Like, definitely immerse yourself, so that way you have a ton of experience to pull upon. And even maybe it's not the exact field that you want to go into, but that because you can get so much more from it, rather than just going and shadowing for like, maybe a combination of like 5 days between a couple different places. It's such a small view. So
yeah, I think that's a great lesson, right? There's a couple things that it did for you. Number one, like, if you just do the bare minimum, maybe you don't get in, but also you just don't learn as much, right? So it's like, by doing a little bit of extra, you can show that commitment. But then at the end of the day, it really benefits you the most, just because you're sitting there gaining knowledge as you're doing it. In my opinion, like, there's no better place to learn than through life, through living, right? So that it did a couple things for you and got to where you are now. And then, yeah, I guess my last kind of background question is, tell us your official role with the Blue Jays. Give us more background on that. And really, I mean, I guess the easiest way to kind of give us that is like, what does an average day look like for you? Which is one of my unfair questions, because I don't know that there really is an average day, but what are the responsibilities that fall on your plate on a semi-normal day? Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. So like, my technical role is, I'm a strength and conditioning coach with the Toronto Blue Jays. And like, I'm one of the coaches that each year we have, different affiliates, and like, I would be an affiliate strength and conditioning coach. A normal day at the affiliate is kind of like probably waking up around 8 o'clock or so. Going in, getting my own workout done, knocking things out for work. And there's a lot of different things that can be done there. But I would say typically guys start rolling in at noon for lifts. I'll take our position players through lift. We'll get some monitoring things in to make sure they're in a good spot, good to go. Making sure they're getting prepped for the day. After that, they're going to go in and they're going to start doing some of their cage work, maybe some early work too for defensive reps. And then as soon as they're done, we're going to have some pitchers start to roll in. We're doing kind of the same thing too, right? It's like monitoring guys and making sure they're in a good spot, seeing how they feel, doing some jumps on guys, making sure they're all set. Once we're able to kind of get that time, we progress into kind of like practice for the day, where I'll go out there and I'll take guys through a dynamic warm up. And then as soon as that's done, it's like we get a couple, like if it's team fundamental or just, some basic defensive reps in. Our pitchers are thrown by that time. I'm conditioning them. And as soon as that's done, like during BP, I'm taking pitchers in, we're getting the lift. That goes up pretty much right up into game time. I might have like a half an hour before that. So it's get some food. Game time's either like 6 or 6:30. And then from there, it's watching the game. We'll do a couple of in-game metrics too that we're tracking. So it's kind of doing that, cheering the guys on. As soon as the game's done, then it's kind of breaking things down, but then also planning for the next day. So I would say it's pretty much like 8 o'clock in the morning till roughly like, 10:30 or like 11 o'clock at night. You're pretty much like getting up and getting geared up for the day.
Yep, those hours sound about right. I used to work in minor league baseball before I did this, so that's about the same clock that I was working off of, right? And I knew there was a little bit of a routine to what you do, but I also know it varies, right? I mean, you're at a work day right now and you're recording a podcast, so it's not always exactly the same, but I think it's that's the table pretty good for what you do and how you got there. It gives us some good background to really dive into your topic, which is what I want to do now, because if you're looking at the world of performance, strength conditioning, all that, man, I mean, we could talk about a million different things. And so we thought it'd be fun to ask each of you to really let's create a narrow topic and let's dive in a little bit deep on that. So the one that you and I are going to chat about today, conditioning and workload management. So we're going to dive into the details of that as we go. Let's start with a couple things. So, when I say that phrase, let's start it with a high level breakdown from you. Like, what do you mean by workload management? Is that as simple as just rest? Let's start with that. And then also let us know as you're explaining that, why is this a topic that you wanted to discuss in the first place?
Sure. So workload management to me is essentially just managing everything that we have going on throughout the day, right? So when we think about this, it's like, we only have so much energy, right? It's like you wake up, you're able to get a good night's rest, you're feeling energized. But, as we know, as the day is going on, like, we're trying to get coffee, whatever it might be, right? It's a little pick me up because, we're getting tired as the day goes on. So to me, when we're dealing with professional athletes, it's like these guys are pushed to the limit. They're obviously already really highly trained, but still at the end of the day, like, they're going to get tired. They're going to get beat down too. So I really like this topic because it's really it's trying to develop a system of how can we make sure these guys are getting the work in that they need, but they're also able to perform and outcompete the rest of the competition. So I guess like simply put, right, it's like, I'm really interested on being able to like, how can we work smarter, not necessarily always harder, because we know that more always isn't the answer.
Yeah, I had a feeling it was going to be a bit more nuanced than I might think. Just so you hear those words initially, right? There's just basically how do you manage your day, right? Which could, but if we look at it that way, we could go a lot of different ways with that. Like we could really dive into different things that we're talking about managing a day. So I kind of looked at that and. Probably naively a little bit was like, well, I want to kind of focus on the rest and recovery side of things because we're not talking about that quite as much as some of the other stuff, right? Like other things that you're doing, I think we could go different ways with it, but I do think it's pretty beneficial to talk about how do we work in, some of that time for recovery. And recovery doesn't have to necessarily mean recover from a workout, just recover from what you're doing, right? But I think that topic really applies to anybody that's listening, whether they're a baseball player or not, right? And so I want to spend a few questions talking about that and kind of how it looks a little bit, right? Now, I guess I'll start looking from a broad perspective because I want to be inclusive on this topic. If I'm looking at recovery as a whole and rest as a whole and schedule as a whole, is this something that's going to differ from person to person? How personalized does that get for people? Or is there like an ideal schedule that most people can work off in regards to their workload for a day?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of really good conversations out there around this as well currently. But the way that I look at it, like, let's say again, like we're considering it from the affiliate model, I would definitely say the rest and recovery is definitely going to differ from person to person, and just thinking of how kind of unique each person is, right? Like you might have some guy, let's say, like for the sake of it, the environment we're going to be talking about is, let's say the recovery at the end of the day, when a guy's getting back to the hotel or back home from the field. Like, let's kind of consider that for the time being right now. But it's like, you have some guys that are going to get back, they're going to talk to their girlfriend, their parents, or whatever it might be. You have some guys that are going to play video games. You have some guys that might read a book. And then you probably have some that, are just going to go to sleep right away. So it's like you have all these different kind of like characters that you're dealing with. And I think that's where with a lot of this that it comes down to, first and foremost, if you are an affiliate strength and conditioning coach, is you really got to know and have relationships with your guys. So that way they can tell you a lot of this stuff of what their typical routine is or what their interests are. Because again, like you're going to have guys that maybe they just for whatever reason, they can't get to sleep after the game. I've had multiple guys say, after they have a game that they pitch in, that they can't get to sleep for a while because they're constantly thinking about it. So I do think that's where, again, the individualization comes in of knowing what are some of the things that these guys are going through. And then it's really just kind of creating a basic routine, just something to get a little bit of traction to help create a new habit, because I'm guilty of it on myself. It's, when we're going in season, it's just like the days get long. You want some extra time to like just kind of hang out. And, sometimes it is, I fall into a bad habit where it's like, all right, maybe I will play a little bit of video games after the day versus knowing that I want to read some books. But at the same time, it's like, I just want something to unwind. So, and the other thing that I'll say too, though, right, is like with sleep, I would say there's probably one basic thing, right? And we want guys to be getting, plus or minus that 7.5 hours, 8 hours of sleep, because we do want to make sure that the circadian rhythm for guys is in a good spot. Because if we do have guys that are consistently getting like 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours, 4 hours of sleep, it's like, we know that's going to be a problem. So I would say from like a bigger picture, that would probably, maybe for lack of a better term, like that would be my cookie cutter way of saying it. It's like, hey, like guys, we got to make sure we're getting enough sleep. That's where it's constant for everybody. Mm-hmm. But then the individualizations that come in is based on like, how does this person handle stress? How do they handle the day? How do they unwind from things? So that's where I'd say is then we kind of have to work in and make, kind of different adjustments for guys.
Yeah, there's hard to apply anything universal in this world because everybody is different from the person standing next to you, right? So, I was just kind of wondering how much it varies, which, it sounds like there's some core things that you want to work in, but then they're also going to work off of who that person is at the same time. So I'm going to guess that also leads to different schedules for conditioning and players and management. You got to tackle it a little bit different depending on who you're talking to, which makes sense. And let's say, you're looking at one player specifically, you're kind of getting to know them, kind of how they operate and what they, how they work. In what ways can you go up to that player, work with them on this workload management, on rest and recovery, and then actually see that play out on the field, right? So basically what I'm asking her is like, can you give me a specific example of how you could look at someone and really work with them and really nail down and make sure they're getting that 7-8 hours of sleep and make sure they're managing what's on their plate? And then how can that translate? Like, how can you look at that and be like, oh, I can tell now that this person is focusing on this? Like, how does it play out?
Sure. So that's, again, another great question. And that's where, like, again, like we kind of talked about in the last question, right? It's like you kind of have your foundation things of, again, make sure you get your sleep and then individualize it per guy. But this is where now I kind of look into it, right? Of, okay, what are the things that are really going to matter to these guys? If it's a pitcher, it's probably going to be pitch velocity, how many strikeouts you get, some of those in-game metrics. So how my head naturally kind of goes about it, and we're very, very fortunate here with the Toronto Blue Jays. Like, we have so many different avenues and opportunities to really like measure workload. We're very fortunate with it. So like one that we look at is going to be jumps, right? So whether you're a position player or a pitcher, you're going to get jumped a couple times a week. We're able to look at those jump trends over time. And that's just something where instantaneously, as soon as the guy jumps, it's got rolling averages. It's got obviously where they're hitting today. So we're able to have an immediate conversation with the guy. And I'll tell you, and I'm sure you can speak to this too of your time in baseball, but when a guy jumps and if it's a low number, they're going to tell you, yeah, I kind of feel a little bit crummy today. Okay, cool. We need to make some adjustments to the routine. And at that same time, you might have a guy where they're really down, or you can just tell from body language too. And we actually had a guy that we needed to make some adjustments last week with, and he was actually able to hit like some of the best numbers. He's a pitcher. For pitch velocity that he's hit in a while. And it was all just because we were able to identify, okay, this guy looks like he's having a little bit of a rough day. He looks a little bit more tired. Had some conversations with him. He did say he was tired. He said he had some stuff going on. We were supposed to get a lift, and the guy's like, I'll hit it. Like, we can definitely do that. I don't know if it's best. but we ended up basically kind of giving him a little bit more of like a mobility circuit, a little bit of cardio, and a little bit of activation, because at the end of the day, if you have a guy that has to pitch in 2 days, it's like you don't want to beat him down more because he's already, obviously struggling. So that's what I would kind of say is where we can kind of look at this and make those immediate impacts of like, okay, if you had a bigger day of conditioning too, let's just keep it nice and easy on the bike. The goal of the session today is to get you to bounce back and just kind of wake the body up more so we can, again, promote more of those physiological recovery mechanisms. So that way, by the time you get out there for your game in 2 days, like you're ready to go. So obviously we don't want to sit there and necessarily like deload guys all the time. Like we do have some certain metrics we want to maintain for in-season lifting as well too. But there's definitely going to be times where we have to make that adjustment. And that just so happened to be the right move because pairing it up with some of the in-game stuff, he had a great outing. So
yeah, I mean, I had a feeling like obvious answer to that question was going to be like just flat out your energy level is going to be completely affected by that. But as I've listened to you talk, I'm kind of sitting here thinking there's probably not a whole lot of aspects of performance that aren't affected by something like this, right? I mean, just focus, time to exhaustion. There's so many things that come into play that probably none of it's going to get to where you want it to be if you don't have some plan and focus on, what's on your plate and rest and all that kind of stuff. So it probably plays out in a ton of different ways. Right. And if I'm thinking and learning about this and knowing like, okay, like this is clearly pretty important, to what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I do need to have a focus on my schedule and on what's on my plate and on resting. How much do you think that should be planned out ahead of time? Like, should I go into tomorrow already knowing what that's going to look like? Should I plan this kind of thing out for a week? Like, hey, I know I got X number of games, this much to do this week. Let me try to schedule this out before we even get rolling here. Or is it a bit more like on a day-to-day thing? Wake up, see how you feel, adjust based on that. Like, how much does planning come into play?
So planning is huge. And that's where I would say it's probably best, again, in the setting that I'm in here with baseball, like we're in a system now. Like when I first started, we would have 3-game series and then we'd travel. So it was a little bit challenging because especially from lifting, it was kind of like you get in and get out really quick. Now we have 6-game series where it's kind of nice that you can kind of settle into things. But again, yeah, I would say planning is very important because at the end of the day, you have like, as a baseball player, you're going to have 6 days that you're ultimately getting assessed, right? What I mean by assessed is if you're a position player, like you could be a guy that plays every day, 3 days, whatever it might be, but it's like you have to go out and perform and then you get your off day. So the way that I think about it and talk to it with the guys is, we're going to have our weekly routine and then we're also going to have that off day where we kind of have that available. If we got in a bad spot last series or maybe just facilities were rough or whatever it might be, rainouts or something like that, that's kind of like a day we can do what we need. But I do typically like to emphasize that, like, hey, like, let's not even think baseball. Let's get you to relax a little bit. But within the weekly schedule too, is we also have to know, like, what are our high days going to be? What are like maybe a moderate or again, maybe a low day? Because if we don't have any concept of that and you're running hot all the time, or maybe you're running low all the time, it's like, those are two things that are going to put you at an increased risk of injury. And obviously we don't want that when you have so many games to play throughout the year. So yeah, I would say it's very important. And you can still, once you have that weekly plan in place, and you could even have it longer, you have a monthly plan too, but I still just like weekly for this example, then you can make those day-to-day adjustments, right? Is if it's supposed to be a low day and you're feeling really, really tired from your past couple of days because maybe you took 2 really high days and it was supposed to go high, medium, low, is we can make even more adjustments on that day and as the week goes on, but you really do have to have a weekly template that you're going off of to make those daily adjustments for after.
I like that answer. I'm a planner by nature. I like go to bed planning out my day for the next day before I even fall asleep. So I was hoping you would go that route because I do think it makes sense. It's hard to just always be on the fly when you've got so many different things to tackle, right? It's good to look at it ahead of time. And obviously things are going to come up and things are going to happen and you just you also got to be able to adjust. But yeah, I kind of I was hoping that you would say planning is important so I could justify my own way of living, which is probably a little bit too much, but it's how I operate. And if I'm looking at the planning process and let's say that I am planning out a week, like you said, and I got to try to figure out some off time in there. Let's just say, like, let's take one of your players. Like, there's an off day, right? And so, let's say I really want to use that as, a full-blown recovery day and rest as much as possible. Is it if it's an off day I'm talking about here, Is there anything specific I should be doing like to make that a full recovery day, or is it your advice like literally like, hey, detach as much as possible, like literally like do nothing as much as you can? Like how off should I truly be, or should there still be some other things in the mix?
Yeah. So, and I will say this isn't like I'm not at like I don't know as much about this aspect. I do really really value it. But kind of what I'm getting to though is kind of just making sure I do have a very high appreciation for making sure that you can detach mentally from things, because again, it is a grind. It's we're playing and we're all working so much that is definitely a core emphasis of what I'd like for the day for the guys. So that way they can just kind of like relax and not have to stress out about baseball or work or, competing for their career. So that's definitely, that's a big aspect of the off day. But at the same time too, right, is I don't necessarily want a guy just playing video games all day, because then you go from, being highly, highly active to now you're just, sitting around in your bed. So yeah. I would say some of the big things that I try and advocate for guys is, again, like kind of like mental clarity, be able to detach. It is just kind of talking about maybe the area that we're by. Like we're kind of lucky here in Manchester is that we are, I think it's about like 45 minutes to an hour. It really just depends on traffic from Boston. We also have some beautiful lakes, some beautiful areas to hike here. And there's also some really good restaurants around. So I do think it is something as simple as that of like, hey, get out, do something new, go explore, like get some sunlight, maybe go shopping, whatever it might be. But then still can obviously advocate with the guys too is, hey, you can still do some mobility stuff. If you do want to hop on like the bike or the treadmill at the hotel, or again, like just go for like a little jog or something. Like I like to have a lot of freedom with that, but just kind of, again, let them detach from things with a little bit of like parameters on it. But I'm sure you kind of get what I mean there.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, don't do absolutely nothing, but just take the day to kind of like not be a baseball player, like be somebody that has, just a day off to go enjoy life. I think that's the biggest thing that I'd advocate for there.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured like working a stretching session could be a good thing, yeah. Or just going on a walk, could be a good thing, right? I'm sure there might have been some people hoping you would just say, no, play video games all day long. And you're probably not saying right? don't do that for an hour or two, probably not a bad thing, but 12 hours straight,
everything maybe in moderation.
Right. We could find some more efficient uses of the time. So yeah, I was kind of curious how much, turning things off really means, right? So I think that's a good thing to look at it. And I'm thinking, because I'm thinking a lot about off-time recovery, working this into the schedule with everything else that you got going on. I'm going to guess I know the answer to this, but I want you to clarify it for me. Do you view this workload management, making sure that you're working some rest in here, some off-time in here, all this kind of stuff? Do you view this as so important? Because as a strength and conditioning coach yourself, do you think that like if we do too much, or let's just say strength training as an example, if strength training, if that's something that we're doing way too often, can that end up actually hurting performance, right? Can someone train too much to the point that it's detrimental? Obviously, can someone put too much on their plate to the point that it's detrimental? Is that why this is such an important topic? Because you can actually end up doing the opposite of what you're trying to do.
Completely, yeah. And I feel like it does really go back to just everything in moderation, right? If you came into the weight room and you tried to get after it every single day, but you're also a guy that's playing baseball every single day, your body can only handle so much, right? So that's where it is so important. Again, getting back to the whole planning aspect is knowing what each day is going to look like throughout the week, being able to reflect on that too, right? Throughout the week. That's the great thing about it. And where our guys are so lucky that we have so many staff members available to them. But we kind of set out with our intent of the week of how are we looking to feel, how are we looking to perform, what numbers are we looking to hit in the weight room. And by being able to monitor everything with jumps and just the conversations of how are the guys feeling is like, we make those adjustments then, but the whole end goal, right, is as a professional athlete, unless you are a bodybuilder or unless you are an Olympic lifter or something that competes within like lifting or a power lifter, you have a whole other sport that you're supposed to be performing in. So we don't want to sit here and beat you down so you're so tired, because at the end of the day, the body just can't handle going at, operating at 90 to 100% intensity, getting crushed in the weight room all the time, and then go compete in another game on top of that. So.
Yeah, and baseball is such a unique sport. On top of that, there's no other sport that plays that many games, that many days back to back. It's a grind on players, and so you got to make sure that that's worked in. And yeah, even for the average person listening, right? Like, it's probably I'm jealous that someone would be able to work out every day. I can't. It's hard for me to find that motivation, right? So I'm kind of happy when you tell me, oh, I probably should take some days off, because I don't think that's a bad thing for your body either, right? So it's all, yeah, moderation is a pretty key thing that you've mentioned a few times that obviously going to come into play with that. And if we're working that into our schedule, I got to imagine there's some other things that you want to work into your schedule. So I'm looking at this idea of workload management. There's got to be a couple other key things that I bet you like people working into their plan. We've already talked about sleep being a huge priority, working that into your plan every single day. Another one that I'm also going to bet you view as a priority when it comes to all this is nutrition. And I've kind of made sure that I've worked this question into most of these discussions, because I know how much nutrition plays a role in everything, performance, strengthening, and everything that we're talking about. So let's say I'm one of these people and listening to this podcast, I'm like, okay, I should really plan things out, like for my week, try to manage what I got on my plate. Let's put a plan together. How much should I make sure, I'm putting a nutrition plan together alongside that? When I'm eating, what I'm eating, how often I'm eating. Do you view that as just as important as the rest of this?
I do. I really do. And that's the thing, is I'm obviously respecting that I don't know it all. I was able to study a little bit of nutrition back in college, and I would say, like, first and foremost, I would refer to pretty much everybody of, like, whether it is like, mental performance, if it is, like consulting, again, like your nutrition, like getting with the dietitians or the professionals within that field, for obviously like the best like plan for it. But I would say even from my side too, right, is just kind of more so from a personal aspect is, yeah, it's just making sure if you have like a weight gain goal or a weight maintenance goal as well too, is being able to talk to those individuals, but also knowing too, right, it's like, how important is it to make sure you're hitting all of your meals, or how important is it of knowing like what is the best snack for you to go to, right? Because it can be really easy now that there's the whole Uber Eats and, DoorDash and things like that. I mean, that some guys really like McDonald's, some guys really like Buffalo Wild Wings and pizza and things like that. But you also have to know too, is what's the difference between that and maybe getting a nice wholesome cooked meal that has, nice lean meats of, like, let's say it's chicken, a salad, you've got some greens, and then maybe it's like sweet potatoes or something in there too. It's like when you're able to see that breakdown and see how the calories basically like go into your body and how your body's going to use it, it'd be like night and day. I feel like the comparison would be is like if I had a guy in the weight room and I had a program actually based off of his maxes, or if I just extremely undercut him, right? And I was like, hey, we're just going to do body weight stuff today. And it's a guy that, is maybe elite at like deadlifting, squatting, all of those things. They sit there and look at you and they'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, I can do a lot more than this. It's the same thing when you're not fueling your body correctly. It's like you're cutting yourself off from recovery, being able to perform. And again, it can really have a cascading effect there. So I'd love to be able to go more in depth with it. But again, I haven't studied nutrition like to that much in depth for a while, but I know enough to say it's very important to make sure you're eating the right things and planning a lot of it out to support your performance.
Yeah, no, I think just that information is key. And trust me, I'm not a dietitian either. That's why I don't have tons of questions about this, but I do.
Sure.
I work alongside one. I know enough to know how crucial it is as part of the performance puzzle. And it's still like, when I'm on the road and I'm talking to students and I'm talking to athletes a lot, it's pretty staggering the amount of people that don't have any level of nutrition plan, right? And so I don't try to necessarily put together a plan for them, but I do say, hey, look, you could get together on a Sunday night and spend an hour of your day and put together, 7 peanut butter and jellies and make bags of trail mix, and just because so often it's like, oh, I don't have breakfast this day because I don't have the time. Well, you didn't plan for that. That's, you could have easily fixed that problem. So I just think it needs to be part of that planning and part of that workload management and part of the schedule, because that's going to, really play out in regards to everything else that you got on the schedule alongside that, which is one of the things I wanted to tie together. And one of the last things I want to tie together, which is a double play on that word, is that I want to tie together everything that we're talking about, but also what our foundation does as well, because, we're sitting here talking about, okay, athletes, might have a lot on their plate. They might, whether it's a baseball player or somebody else, like it's just life throws a lot at you. And so, some people might get overwhelmed a little bit by like, okay, I've got to plan all this out, but I've got this many games. I'm trying to accomplish this weight gain goal. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. And what can happen is that can sometimes lead people to get tempted by using something like PEDs to achieve those goals, right? And try to find a shortcut through using something like that, especially because recovery is just a common reason to use something like that. So to tie all this together and what we do and what the topic is and what you do, for anyone listening that's kind of considering that as an option to bypass a lot of this stuff, what is one thing that you want to tell them or leave them with in regards to that topic?
Well, I think the big thing is, right, and even as you're kind of listing that off, right, is it can be very stressful to be an athlete just because you have so many things going on, and especially at a young age, right? It's like, you're trying to compete, you hear things of, hey, if you can be really good at athletics, you can go compete at college and, they'll pay for school. And then, there's all these avenues for you. But so I can see how that can be tempting. But I will say at the end of the day, though, is kind of being able to take a step back from things and almost kind of consider, like, what is the one thing that if I was able to do it right now, that would make everything easier. And I take that from a book. It's called The One Thing, because I really, really liked it. But I think when you look at it, a lot of people that get into that were, right, like using too many things, like, what is it? Like things in moderation, right? Same thing with caffeine. People down coffee, energy drinks, things like that all the time, typically because it's a Band-Aid for something they're not good at. It's because they're probably not getting the best sleep. They're probably not planning their day out as best as possible. And they're kind of like flying by the seam of their pants. So what I would say is, to everything that we've been talking about, whether it's getting with a strength and conditioning coach, getting with a mental performance coach, getting with a dietitian or a nutritionist, but it's just start to actually develop your plan, because the majority of people are not writing this stuff out. They're not planning it out. The professionals are, obviously, that's why we have jobs for it. But I would say these people would be very, very like shocked and surprised when you actually get with the professionals that can help you with a lot of these goals, and you'll be able to have more ease of mind too, because at the end of the day, you have people doing that for you. And really, wherever you're at, even if, let's say, your environment may not have the funds for that, I guarantee you there's somebody at your school or wherever you might be that would have a resource that can get you in touch with it. I mean, honestly, even too, right? Just to like this podcast is like, people are always welcome, I'm sure, to, coaches that you've had on here to contact. Like, I think at the end of the day, like, everybody's in this field of the human performance field is because we want to help people. So I think it really is just like doing some research, reaching out to people that are willing to help you. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people aren't doing the foundational things the right way. And that's what's really going to make that change. So, I mean, that's what I would say is, like, let's not put a Band-Aid on it. Let's really dial things in and make sure we're doing all the basics correct, because that's going to yield the best results for you. Because we have guys here in professional baseball, all across professional sports, that it's just, they outplay guys because they are so dialed in. They're coming into the same time. They're noticing something is wrong with the routine, right? Of like, let's say if I've done that before, where it's maybe I have the wrong thing in there for a day for a guy because something changed. They come in, they're like, hey, Case, I got this going on tomorrow. Like, let's make sure this is in there for me. It's like, oh, thanks, man. But it's just, you have to have that mentality that leave no rock like uncovered, to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to own the basics and to just go out there and compete every day. So.
Yeah, I think it's a great message to kind of start to wrap this thing up with. There's a couple of things that you said that really stuck with me. Number one, it's refreshing to hear people say, because I say this too, like, I get why someone would be tempted for that. I do. I understand. Like, I get why shortcuts are popular, right? But then I also look at people that take them on the long run, and they're, number one, not worth it, because obviously not rewarding option. Number two, a risky, just dangerous option for your health, right? So it's like, I always tell people, like, I don't shy away of understanding why people would be thinking about this or that. But I've also been around enough people that know that it never pans out. And so I think that's a refreshing thing to say, because I just know that it's a bit human nature there. And I also like, just what you said, like, there's help out there, because there is, right? Like, if anyone's listening to this and thinking like, this is way too overwhelming to try to plan out my weeks or do this or do all that, it is if you're by yourself, right? But you're not, even if it feels that way, just a podcast like this or information out there, just Google like schedules and what it is like. We're all have similar goals at the end of the day, and there's other people that are probably trying to do the same thing that you are. And there's obviously healthier and safer options out there, which is, I think, a great time to really pull this together. And I appreciate you being one of the people out there that wants to help just by getting this information out there. I think it's doing exactly that. And so I'll leave you with one last question. Is there anything that I missed that you want to get out there that's helpful in your mind from your experience? Because I know, again, we kind of said before, workload management can be a pretty broad term. So we focused a good bit on rest and recovery and schedules, but anything that we missed that you want to throw out there in regards to this topic, or any final tips that you got?
No, I guess like the one, or I say no, but yeah, the one last thing I'd say, just kind of like building off of what I was kind of mentioning there in that last question you had, but I think the most important thing is just, again, doing your research. Like, obviously, athletes, we have interest in things. We want to perform better. We have a lot of questions on, right, like, how can I make the team, or how can I play to the next level? But just go out there, and the things that we talked on today is look up the people that are doing this and just reach out. Like, that was something for me. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I remember like reaching out to some of the sports teams there. And even if I didn't get responses, it just was kind of like, I'm going to reach out and see what they have to say. And, I was actually able, like, really fortunate enough to get from one of the teams, like, just kind of like some, like, well, I guess what's the best way to say it, but just kind of like positive confirmation on what I was doing. And it meant a lot to hear from a professional in this field at that time, where I'm, a young strength and conditioning coach coming up, like, looking for knowledge, this and that. And I was able to kind of go into that facility, and we were able to have a sit down talk. And I think, again, is just, you don't know until you ask. And if you don't ask, you're never going to know. So it's just one of those things of, go out there. And even if it is, I don't know if you're taking my information down on this, but, like, I love talking about it a ton. So if people wanted to reach out to me, but it's just, you don't know until you ask people, because I don't know. I think people just get afraid at times, right? It's like, oh gosh, these people work in this setting. It's like we all come from someplace, like, we all had to learn. So I think that's the biggest thing, is go out there, do something that makes you uncomfortable, contact some big people out there, even if it's professional athletes too, whether it's, the Instagram or whatever it might be. But I think that's probably the most important thing, is go and reach out to the people that have kind of, like, been doing it for a while, see if they'll help, see if they point you in the right direction, because that's really just how you start learning, and you'll get a lot you're great things that way.
Yeah.
So
now you're passing the torch. Yeah. No, you're passing the torch now, right? Like, I mean, you reached out, people helped you, and now you're willing to do the same thing, not only through this podcast, but just if anyone wants to reach out. And I'll do that. I'll put, your contact info in the show notes, just in case people have questions about this topic. I can already tell that you'd be willing to answer those and help people out. So I appreciate you doing that and taking the time for this podcast. And actually, I did lie to you. I told you that was my last question before I let you go, though. I actually want to ask you a couple of real quick hitter questions that have actually nothing to do with workload management at all. Sure. But since I'm doing 4 of these podcasts with various strength coaches, and I'm asking all of you the same final 2 questions, because I want to see if you overlap. I want to see if you give me the same answers. So they're pretty quick, but give me the first things that come to mind. So here's number 1. I've been asking everybody this. Let's say I'm at home and I want to start my own home gym, right? So I got some goals. I want to start working on them, but my budget is small. It's limited, man. I got only can buy one piece of equipment, which I know is totally unfair, but I got to start somewhere, right? So what's the very first and most versatile thing that I should go out and buy?
Well, I feel like this is almost a little unfair, because you have to buy some accessory things with it. But for me, it like, when I did it, it was a barbell. So again, you buy the barbell and you got the weights there. If, again, we're being very literal on, like, what's the one thing, I would probably then go to a kettlebell, just at, like, a good weight, because then you can do a lot of stuff with it. So
I like it. Both those works. You kind of overlapped a little bit. I was talking with Logan a couple of days ago. He started with barbell and weights, and then I told him, well, I don't know, barbell and weights are 2 things. I don't know if I'm going to count that.
Exactly.
He went back, and he actually told me the same answer that Derek told me with the D-backs, which was his initial response. So those were power blocks. I don't know if that came to your mind, but that was their first thing. No, but I like kettlebell too. Yeah, I've seen entire workouts that are done with nothing but a kettlebell, so that makes sense in my mind. Yeah. So, all right, that works. And then your second question, I will see if you overlap with the other guys. So just knowing you're in this space, I'm curious what your favorite stadium is that you've ever walked into. And I'm not limiting this to Major League Baseball stadiums. It can be minor league, it can be college stadium, international. It doesn't really matter. When I say, like, favorite stadium, is there an obvious answer that comes to your mind?
Man, okay, this is good. I'll say, I just want to put it out there. I've loved a ton of the minor league stadiums that I've gone to.
Sure.
Mainly just because, like, I love the character of them. Like, obviously it's a grind, and sometimes it's just, like, small areas, but I will say it's cool to see all the towns with it. But when I'm thinking about this, I feel like I should be saying Lambeau Field, because I'm from Wisconsin, a Packers fan. But I've only been there, like, once, so I haven't gotten, like, nearly as much of experience there compared to Camp Randall in Madison, Wisconsin. So I got to say it's Camp Randall, just because the amount of games that I've gone there, and just, like, how great of a college town that is. that's probably been my most favorite stadium to go to.
Okay, so first of all, let's do a couple things here because you played to your audience in a couple ways. So I used to manage minor league baseball stadiums, so I like your first answer because I used to run those. So I appreciate your fondness for that.
Sure.
I also grew up in Athens, Georgia. I'm a huge college football fan, so Sanford Stadium is probably going to be up there for me as well. But let me try to do one more thing to see if you get the same answer as the other guys. So, all right. The other guy's answers was a Major League Baseball stadium. So I don't know how many of those you've been to, but if you had to pick a Major League Baseball stadium, I'm making it specific, even though I told you I wouldn't. Is there one of those that come to mind?
Yeah, so I would say basically like the Brewers. I grew up going to their games as well too. I want to say, and this is terrible on my end being in baseball now, but they did recently change it. I want to say it's American Family Field now. But I was actually able to go to one of the last games in like the old stadium that we had. So it's kind of cool going from that, but then also seeing as soon as we were able to get the retractable roof, seeing the Brewers kind of like take it to the next level. I will say that was always a blast. And that was also something too that we did in high school was it was like on our senior day because we went to Brewer games and we tailgate all the time. So I'd say that's it. That's definitely the one for me from the Major League side.
I like it. That's always Miller Park to me, no matter what they call it now. So
exactly.
I like it. The other answers were PNC in Pittsburgh, which is actually my favorite stadium. I don't know if you've been to that one. It's a beautiful setting, and then Oracle and San Fran, which I'm not going to argue with that one either. I'm not going to argue with any of these answers.
Yeah.
They're all winners, but I was curious to see where we all overlap. So a fun way to end it, but more importantly than that, just Casey, thanks for sharing your knowledge. This was great. You know, I learned a few things. I know people listening will as well. So thanks for passing that along, and thanks for willing to be a resource even after this. So I'll put your contact info in there. But for now, thank you for the time. I truly enjoyed it, and I hope we get to do it again soon.
Of course. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.